Well, hello again. Welcome back to the Horror Tours. And in this little video, we're going to talk about the 5 chainsaw rating system.
Plus an optional 6th.
That's correct. It's a lot easier to do 5 on one hand, though. So, for the most part, we have a rating scale of 1 to 5. We have 5 different criteria, sometimes 6, where we rate our various home haunts, yard displays, and pay haunts.
It's like a vowels, you know, there's 5 vowels, A, E, I, O, U, but sometimes Y, that's how our rating system is.
And sometimes we do ask ourselves why we're even rating some of these. Alright, that was very little humor there, but I'm going to let Paul start you off with number 1. The very first category we have is the amount of decorations.
The amount of decor in the place. This is one of my favorite things because I love the decorations. I love these little fiddly diddly stuff that they have. The amount of decorations they have, our mascot,
Decoration.
In a place, especially, this is very true most with yard displays, it's very true, but even pay haunts, it doesn't matter. They have a certain amount of space they can fit a lot of things into, and they can have them here and there. The amount of decorations, along with the quality of them, which is another one, but we like seeing decorations if there's different things to look at. Some haunts we go to, you can look here, you can look there, you can look here, and you can turn around and see something new. Some we go to, there's something over here and something over here, and that's it.
Exactly, and I think another way that we look at the amount of decorations is obviously we're not expecting to see the same amount based on the region that we go to and based on the type of haunt that we go to. So if we go to a yard display in Chicago, let's say on the south side, we're not necessarily expecting to see the same amount of decorations that we might see in Frankfurt or Mokina or Plainfield or some other suburb like that. We're just not.
That doesn't mean they won't be there. Just generally, as a general rule, it's probably not going to be the same.
Yes, it's all about expectations. For example, if we go to a pay haunt that costs $20, let's say, our expectations are going to be a little bit higher than they are if we go to some free yard display that we're not expecting anything.
We're going to expect to see more live actors at those. If it's $20, then at a smaller pay haunt, less costing one, if it's $5, we don't expect to see maybe 4 or 5 people. $20, we want to see at least, you know, $1 a person.
And again, when we say expectations, it's not as though we go in there thinking, okay, if we don't see this, we're going to be disappointed, because everyone is unique. So we're not necessarily expecting a set thing. It's just sort of, you get what you pay for, if you will. So when you pay for something, it's a little bit more than when you don't. But that being said, the amount of decorations varies from place to place, and as Paul said, it's about quality as well as about quantity. So if we go to a place that has limited yard space, but they have a lot of props there, they could be static or animatronic, it depends, doesn't really matter. We judge it on that. That's one of our criteria that we use. That's probably the first one that we kind of look at is something you can see as soon as you walk up to a place. You can see
just like you summarize it as soon as you just look at it. You know, first impression type of thing.
And that leads us into number 2 in our list of criteria that we use, and that would be effective use of space.
This is a big one because people can get so creative with the use of space. They can take a very small amount of space, turn it into several rooms, and be very creative, have a unique theme in each different room. Or they could take a huge amount of space and have just one little thing here and one little thing there, and it looks very similar. It just depends on the haunt you go to.
That's very true. We have been to haunts, for example, where we've been in a very small garage. They have a very simple walkthrough, let's say. You go in one side, make a U-turn, and go around the other side. And yet the way they have it partitioned off makes it actually quite an interesting haunt. So there are things like that, and then we've also been to places where the garage is just a static display where you look into the garage. You don't necessarily enter the garage, for example. But yet it's an effective use of space. So if a person has a giant yard and has 3 things in their yard in the yard display, that's not necessarily going to be rated all that well. But if a person has a giant yard and it's chock full of things, interesting things to look at, that's an effective use of space.
Or if it's a pay haunt and it has a huge amount of space and only 1/4 of that is used to have decorations and thematic rooms set up, and the rest of it is set up to be a dark maze, it's not going to be, we're going to rate it really lowly because that's a very poor use of space.
That's a very good example, and that's something that we've encountered more than once on our horror tourings, and that is you come to a huge warehouse, a huge setup, a professional pay haunt that in some cases costs a lot of money. You walk into that haunt, and there's a lot of corridor walking, be it in a dark maze or even a lit maze, where you do nothing but walk in circles and or in and out in a zigzag fashion. They may have partitions up, and there's nothing there. No actors, no scares, no props.
Not even any decorations.
You're just walking through corridors.
And it's usually very dark.
Yes, and that is an example of a very ineffective use of space.
Our third criteria that we use for rating our haunts is scare factor. Now this is a big one. This is one of the biggest ones that we've got that makes or breaks the haunt, because the scaring factor, if it's going to be high up there, it's going to be a very high energy level of scare. It's going to make us appreciate that haunt even more. Even if the other things that we graded on are lower down, the scare factor, that could really make up for the difference of it.
Yes, that's very true, and this does predominantly apply to pay haunts. It can apply to home haunts, not necessarily to yard displays. They're not necessarily intended for that, although there are some yard displays that do have a scare factor. They surprise us, and we've been doing this for many years now, and we've seen a lot. So, in any case, that being said, we have done literally hundreds of haunts in our years, and we've seen a lot. So when you do that, you come to see a lot of the same props in different areas. You see a lot of the same themes in different areas. As we mentioned, Chainsaw Guys, there are a lot of different themes that you see. The Crazy Hospital, you often see themes that are based on movies that are very popular.
And it's not that easy to scare us. So the scare factor, to scare us, it's got to be pretty high.
Exactly. Now, that's not to say that if we're not scared, we don't like the haunt.
No, not at
all. That's not the case at all.
That's why we have the other criteria.
There are many other factors that we consider. For example, if we go to a professional haunt, we know they're going to hype it up. We know that. That's not necessarily a deal breaker in any way, because it has to be overall enjoyable in one way or another. And if there's a scare factor on top of that, that's even better. And as I mentioned, just simply saying, well, it's a scare factor, that's not as black and white as it seems. There are many factors that go into play into that, and one of them actually is our fourth criteria, or criterion, I should say. One of them is our fourth criterion, and that is actor enthusiasm.
Actor enthusiasm. That is another one that can definitely make or break a haunt. Again, especially the professional haunt. Yard displays, it doesn't really come into play. But the home haunts and the professional haunts for sure. The actor enthusiasm, if somebody's dressed up like a ghoul, if they're a little kid, they're not as scary as a big guy. But if they're a little kid who's putting all their heart and effort into it and really trying and enthused and good actors, it's going to really make up for it. And if it's a big guy that's just kind of sitting there, even though he's big, he's just like, maybe he's talking to somebody next to him, you know, just not even in character. Breaking character is a big taboo.
Yes, that's a good point that Paul brings up. As part of actor enthusiasm, one of the things that we really look for that takes you out of the mood, definitely, is breaking character. For example, that could be something like you're going through a room and there's a door ahead of you, and you see someone through that door who's an actor, and they have their mask off, or they're talking to somebody else, or they're just kind of hanging around there.
Or texting on a phone.
Yes, and we've seen all of these things, believe us. And when you go through the room, all of a sudden they put their mask on and they, okay, there's no enthusiasm there. That's a waste. And on the other hand, like Paul said, if you get little kids, and we've been to haunts that are staffed by little kids. We've been to haunts that are staffed by grade school age, middle school age, and high school age people, as well as older people, and sometimes a combination of all three.
And if you're senior citizens, though, once in a while.
Occasionally we do.
Occasionally there's a senior citizen.
We do. Sometimes we see them in coffins. No, all kidding aside, seriously, we do. Sometimes they play dead bodies, and they do it really well. So, yes, you do see all kinds, and the point is, it doesn't matter the age, it matters the enthusiasm.
Enthusiasm is a big deal.
And enthusiasm makes up for a lot of things. We know that when we go to these volunteer pay haunts, for example, they're not going to necessarily have professional makeup jobs, professional costumes, professional sets, and that's where enthusiasm comes into play. So if you see somebody who's just got generic zombie makeup on that you might see anywhere that you can buy in the store and do yourself, it's all in the performance. It's all in the performance, and that's something that plays a big role in what we judge on. And as Paul said, enthusiasm or lack of it is almost a deal breaker. We've been to some haunts that we'll never go to again, simply because of the lack of enthusiasm on the part of the actor.
Have no desire to go back, because it was just so. We don't want to be bored when we go to these things.
Exactly.
And we don't want you to go to them if they're boring.
That's very true, particularly if you're going to spend money and wait in a line. Because time is valuable, and obviously your money is valuable. You don't want to be standing in a line, going into some haunt that's hyped up, and 5 minutes later you're out of that haunt after waiting in line for an hour, and you're like, what did I just spend my money on?
Yeah, we want to have a good time, and we want you to have a good time.
That's exactly right. So we'll be honest with our reviews. We're not going to sugarcoat any of that. If we don't like it, we don't like it. And we'll tell you about it. But conversely, if we do like it, and I have to say the majority of haunts that we've been to, we do like, we'll tell you about that too, very enthusiastically. Speaking of enthusiasm. So on the flip side of actor enthusiasm, I'll give you one example of actor enthusiasm and actor really getting into his role. There's one particular haunt that we've been to several times in the past few years where there's a Mike Myers character. And you often see Mike Myers, he's very popular. But this particular Mike Myers, not only does he always stay in character, he meets you in the parking lot and follows you through the entire house. And the house is set up so that Mike Myers will appear in front of you in a room. You go through that room, and all of a sudden he's in front of you in some other room, and you did not see him in between. And the guy who plays Mike Myers, he never breaks character. He looks like him, he acts like him, he's built like him, and I believe it's a teenager doing it. So that's an example right there of a classic haunt that the actor enthusiasm just takes to a new level. You may be bored walking through that haunt, but if you know Mike Myers is going to be in some other room when you don't expect it, it adds that extra something to that haunt. So that's an example of good actor enthusiasm. Okay, our fifth criterion, and this one is one that can apply to all three types of haunts.
All three.
Is originality and or
uniqueness.
uniqueness. That's right. And since Paul is one of the most original people I know, I'll let him talk about the originality aspect.
The originality aspect is great because you see horror movies, horror themes. There's a running through. Sometimes they do them good. Mike Myers is an example. You see him a lot. You see Freddy's, Jason's, Leatherface with chainsaws. Very common. Not that it's bad, but when you run into something that's unique, that's nobody else has, and I find this frequently with the pay haunts if they're in a church. It's so much more fun. It adds that much more to it because it's something you haven't seen before. It's something, when you look at it, you can think, oh, I haven't seen this, and you can kind of take all the criteria we've talked about and put it together in this one thing. And when it's at a home haunt or a yard display, and you know that these people are making an effort, putting their own hearts and souls into these things and seeing things that they make or the way they set something up, it's great because you know it's not the same old, same old. It's got a very unique flavor to it, and it's very enjoyable to look at these things or to walk through these things and to see the way it's done.
Yeah, exactly. I think the originality and the uniqueness is something that makes the difference between going to a haunt once and wanting to go to it again. So, for example, we might drive 2 hours in one direction and go to a haunt that we've never been to before, but if it's the same old, we might not go back there again. Right. On the other hand, it might only take one thing, and actually the rest of the haunt may just be average. But if that one thing is pretty impressive or something that you don't see anywhere else, that's something that makes a difference. So just because it's a yard display, for example, many yard displays have store-bought props that you can see anywhere, and we see a lot of them. We see a lot of the same props all the time. In fact, a number of yard displays / home haunt operators, they know each other. So a lot of the yard displays are similar in certain ways because they share ideas about props. So you do see a thematic type of prop or display in certain years.
For example, they might have skeletons carrying a coffin in their yard.
Yes.
They might have a stand-up Freddy Krueger that's in their display, that's talking, that's animated when you walk by.
Yes. One thing we saw in 2012 was boarded up windows. That was something that we saw at a lot of haunts that we had not seen in years previous. So that's something that is an example of thematic similarity between different haunts. So the originality really adds to the point, and one of the things that plays in a haunt's favor. So there you have it, the 5 criteria that apply to all 3 of our types of haunts. We have the amount of decorations, the effective use of space, the actor enthusiasm, the scare factor, and originality.
Those are the 5.
Those are the 5 that we use for most of our haunts. Now, in addition, for the pay haunts, we have one more criterion that we use for the pay haunts, and this is a pretty obvious one.
That is value for the money.
That's right. Is it worth it to go there? Now, this can encompass anything, really. I know I'm not adverse to paying $20 for a haunt if I'm going to be really entertained. If I go to a haunt, and we have been to some that's 45 minutes long or an hour long, and it costs me $25 to get in, or perhaps it has multiple houses at the same location, and you can get in for $25, and it's a quality haunt, that's fine. Now, on the other hand, there are some haunts I wouldn't pay $5 to get into. And that's what we're talking about, value for the money. It does not mean more money equating to more experience. It doesn't necessarily mean that. Or greater length. Because a lot of haunts, particularly the pay haunts, run, let's say, between 10 and 15 minutes at the long end. There are ones that go farther than that, but for the most part, they are relatively short, relatively brief.
And our value for the money, if we pay $10, do we feel like get our $10 out of it? Do we want you to feel like if you pay $10, will you think it's worth it? Or if we pay $20, is it worth the big price tag? And sometimes it might be, if it's in the Chicagoland, like in Chicagoland, it might cost that much because it costs that much to run. But is it worth it to going up there to pay for it? And if it's in a little church down, in a village nobody's heard of, and it costs $5 to get in, you might feel like it's worth $20. And if it is, if it's that good, we'll let you know.
Yeah, and that encompasses both sides. For example, we've been to haunts where we've paid, let's say, $5, and we easily come out of there saying we would pay double or triple that to go back to that. And then conversely, we've been to other haunts where we say we wouldn't do it if it was free. In fact, I believe there have been one or two that we said we wouldn't do it if they paid us to do it. We wouldn't do it. So there's definitely all sides of the coin there. One of the things I wanted to mention about value for the money is, as Paul stated, price varies no matter where you go. In the city, it might be more expensive than in the suburbs. A church haunt might be much less expensive than a pay haunt. And there are cases where you can just tell that a haunt is disproportionately priced regardless of the quality of the haunt. We've been to some haunts in the past where we just know the price tag is out of range for where it's at and what we're going to get. Even before we even actually go into the haunt, we know that that price range is incorrect.
But there might be something in there with a unique flavor, where our uniqueness comes in, that we might like a lot and think, okay, because it has this is worth, just for this factor, it's worth going to check it out, even though the price might be high.
Now, just to add to what Paul said, this is where all of our criteria come into play. For example, there may be a uniqueness factor, there may be a great thing to see, and the actors may be enthusiastic. It might have all of the good characteristics, but it still might not be a value for the money. It just might not. For example, you could have the best actors, the best props, but if the haunt's 5 minutes long and it costs $20 to get in, it's still not worth it.